Hello, Stuart Charles here, HomeStudioBasics.com, helping you make sound decisions. So, today we're going to talk about iFi's new hip-dac, which looks like a flask. It's a headphone amplifier plus DAC all in one. So, first off, let's get into build, shall we, and features. Yeah, so the build on this is quite nice, quite lovely. It's about 135 grams on my scale. iFi weighs it in at 125 grams, so I'm not sure what the disparity is there. Yeah, on the front, it kind of does resemble the interface of the iFi Zen desktop amp, which I'll also link you guys to up here. But it's a very simple kind of utilitarian design, which I really appreciate. It feels really good in your hand. By comparison, the Q1 was about 101 grams, and the NX4 came in, I think, around 136, if I'm not mistaken. I have to double check that. The NX4 was 148 grams. I think this DAC does tend to attempt to compete with those two. They all three look very similar. This won't be a shootout per se, but we will do a little bit of sound comparison at the end. So strap in, sit back, and enjoy the ride. So yeah, back to build. So the volume pot is an ADC control, so just turn it and it'll click, and then you'll know it's on. You'll see some light color indicators on the front, which we'll get into in a second. On the front, yeah, it's very, very simple. You got the X bass button, and as well as the power match, which is just basically gain, as well as the 4.4 millimeter headphone jack and the 3.5 standard single-ended jack. So if you run imbalanced cables, this is a good choice, but it is 4.4, whereas the standard used to be 2.5. I think they're sort of gravitating towards 4.4. I'm not entirely sure on that, but yeah, everything feels good. On the back, you can see there's different indicators. Instead of being on the front, you'll turn it to the bottom. You'll see it just says in text power match, X bass. It has a on symbol underneath the ADC volume control, and two sets of headphone icons. So one says BAL for balanced, and the other just has the icon. So also on the back, you've got the hip-dac logo and a QR sticker. And on the top, there's the iFi's logo. So yeah, on the back, very simple. You've got the USB Type-C jack for charging only, and the USB Type-A for listening on your desktop. So all in all, it's built very, very nicely, very compact, good shape. Yeah, great color scheme. It reminds me a lot of the Bravo Ocean, sort of a dark turquoise / teal color. So features wise, let's get into features. Now we touched a little bit on features just a second ago, but we'll continue off that. So charge it with the Type-C cable, which is supplied. So in the box, you've got a small blue Type-A cable for your PC. I really like the inclusion of the iFi's OTG cable. It is Type-C, so if you have a phone with micro USB, you're going to have to get a small adapter, which is not a big deal. They're about $7. I'll place a link down below. And while we're at it, all my links for this DAC will be down below, so check out my review. I do get a small commission if you guys end up purchasing something, so much appreciated in advance. So yeah, back to what's in the box. There's also a Type-C charging cable that comes included. So charge time is rated at 12 hours, but I was only getting 6.5. Now I'm not sure what the time is for your phone, but for my PC, I tested it a few different times, and I was getting consistently 6.5 hours. The NX4 is rated at 7.5, and the Q1 is rated at around 10 hours for USB and 20 out of the auxiliary port. So I'm not sure what that's all about, but 12 is definitely not accurate on my PC. Yeah, so basically what you would do if you want to use this with your phone, just use the OTG cable. Hopefully you guys have a phone with Type-C. I would have liked to see an inclusion of some rubber bands for your phone. I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't come with anything to attach. I was using mine mostly with my desktop. It takes around 3 hours for a charge to complete, which isn't too bad. Both the Q1 and the NX4 also around the same. They say less than 4 hours. So all three, you're going to be waiting about the same amount of time. So yeah, all three of them, they look very much alike. The NX4 comes in black or silver, the Q1 is all black, and this baby, like I said, is a darkish teal. Really, really nice color. It's got the a gold, the volume pot is gold on the front, and the 4.4mm jack on the front is also goldish, whereas the bass boost and the power match switches, or buttons rather, are silver. So yeah, when you're connecting it, connect it first to your PC and then turn it on. That will allow it to draw bus power rather than battery power. If you treat it like you would treat your phone, just charge it every time you're not using it, you won't be shit out of luck when it goes dead and you have to recharge it. Like sometimes I'll be listening to music and it just turns off, and it's rather jarring. But yeah, just plug it back in, charge it back up, and you'll be ready to go. Yeah, so this bad boy is MQA enabled, so I'll put a little how-to. Very simple. You go into settings, make sure that it's enabled. Exclusive mode is enabled, so you'll be able to get the full benefits of MQA. Like the Zen DAC, the hip-dac also displays different colors according to source file. So green is 44, 48, 88, or 96K. Yellow will be 176 or 192. Also DXD 352 and 384. Cyan is, of course, 128. DSD 128, 64. Blue is DSD 256, and magenta is MQA. So very similar to the color scheme on the Zen. If it's off, you have no valid signal, aka you're shit out of luck, buddy. So like I said, the volume pot is also an ADC control, which negates channel imbalance issues at lower volumes. I did test this out. At very, very low, you can sense a slight imbalance, but who's going to listen at that level? Overall, very, very good as far as balance between left and right channels goes, so no worries there. On the back of the unit, we mentioned I mentioned the Type-C jack, but also there's a very small LED light underneath, similar to the NX4. For white, anything above 75%, it'll display white. Green is less than 25%. Red is less than 10%, and flashing red is basically just charge the thing. Also, when you're charging it, it will flash. Now, I noticed that sometimes when it's finished charging, it'll show you on the back a solid white LED light. Sometimes the unit will just stay off. I generally turn it off and then charge it, and then sometimes it'll come back on when it's ready. Other times it won't. So just some things to keep in mind. Yeah, power supplies 2 volts into which is 400 milliwatts around, into 16 ohms. So similar to the power output of the DragonFly Red and Cobalt, both supply 2.1. So definitely plenty of power. I was finding myself using the power match. You're going to probably keep that on most of the time, but with that on, you're going to have plenty of headroom here. Without it on, my 600s, HE600s do get loud enough, but you will be mostly maxing out on the volume. So that's that. Let's get into sound now, shall we? I did a lot of A/B specifically with the DragonFly Red. So this is quite a pretty neat comparison. I wasn't really expecting them to sound all that much different. Well, I can't say that. I was surprised to find that with certain genres, the difference in sound is more apparent than it is with other genres. So say, for instance, the differences between the DragonFly and the hip-dac are very, very stark when you're listening to hip-hop. I found that the DragonFly Red is more open, it's more crisp and clear, has more air, it seems to have more air around the instruments, whereas the hip-dac is sort of a kick back and relax type of sound, similar to the Q1. It's a little bit warmer, maybe a tad more, not closed in, but just warmer, just like a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more laid back, a little bit less airy and clear. whereas I noticed that the DragonFly Red is very, very neutral by comparison to the hip-dac. So that's really the main takeaway. With other genres like rock, it wasn't as apparent. I'll put links down below to my article, and you can see everything I listen to. I listen to quite a bit of music here. It's not as apparent with rock, definitely not. The differences are still there, but they're a lot more subtle, whereas with hip-hop it was like a night and day almost. And I did make sure to have the bass boost off for the hip-dac, so there's that as well. I would liken it to, and I use this analogy with the Anandas, but also it applies with the Red. It's almost like skiing down a mountain in January while chewing winter fresh gum. I know that's just kind of absolutely ridiculous, but that's what it reminded me of, listening to the Red versus listening to the hip-dac. It's a lot cooler sounding than the hip-dac is. Hip-dac is more of an amp you want to kick back with, relax, maybe drink a glass of scotch and get trashed, homie. See how on Led Zeppelin, When the Levee Breaks, the differences were still heard, but they were more subtle. Basically is the main takeaway. I think it's easier to distinguish the differences between these two with regards to hip-hop. So I've definitely talked about that ad nausea, yeah. On Interstellar Overdrive, it just seemed like, from Pink Floyd, it seemed like the hip-dac seemed to have a subtle, ever so subtle layer of blankie over it, just a little bit. Not like it sounded congested or bloated or clammy or word salad. We need more word salad. Clammy, clam. Woolly. Thanks, Tile. Yeah, it's a little bit, but I wouldn't call it that. It just, in comparison, it's a little bit more so. Definitely the hip-dac is not congested in its own right. It's just when you put it up against the Fly, you will notice those things a little bit more. I guess the DragonFly also renders music a little bit more forward, a little bit more in your face, whereas like I said, the hip-dac is more of a kickback and relax type of sentiment. Yeah, Yesterday by Dilla, one of my favorite Dilla beats. And it's a great track to compare the two because it's very clean. It hits hard even without bass boost. So the DragonFly Red rendered it more open, more sterile and crisp, but it lacked the weight and body that the hip-dac provided, which I really enjoyed the sound of it more out of the hip-dac with this track in particular anyway. The hip-dac seemed to have more meat on its bones. I would compare it to like a lean bodybuilder that has some muscle on him versus like your average skinny dude. So lastly, we'll get into the comparison between the NX4 and the Q1. These three DACs are very similar in terms of aesthetic, build, features. Aesthetic, build, and features. Sound-wise, I'd say the NX4 is a little bit more sterile and neutral than even the, similar to the sound of the DragonFly Red, while the Q1 is a bit warmer, similar to the relationship between the hip-dac and the Red. So the Q1 and the hip-dac are probably, they're very similar in terms of sound, I would say. The bass boost on the Q1 is definitely a little bit too much. I think it's a 5.4 dB boost if I'm not mistaken, while I don't know what the hip-dac's boost is, but it's a lot better. Like I find myself keeping the hip-dac's bass boost on all the time, and it just adds just the right amount, I would say. Similar to the NX4, I think the NX4's bass boost was 0.4 dB, which was just perfect. Hip-dac, I think, is very similar in that way as well. All three support DSD and have gain and bass functions. The NX4 does not have a balanced 4.4mm jack, but does have a line out. The Q1 Mark II also has a line out function on the front, in addition to its balanced 2.5mm port and standard 3.5mm single-ended port. So instead of Type A, the NX4 has two micro USB inputs, one for charging and the other for listening, whereas of course the hip-dac, like I mentioned, has the Type-C for charging and the Type-A for listening. Charge time on the NX4 and Q1 are rated at less than 4 hours, like I mentioned, while the hip-dac claims 3. Probably a minuscule difference there. There's a very short waiting time for the hip-dac, which is nice. So perhaps a little bit less than the other two. The Q1 Mark II has one micro USB port on the back for connection to a PC. For your phone, you'll either use the auxiliary port for your Android or the supplied Apple Lightning cable for your iPhone and iOS device. With the hip-dac, you will have to, if you have an iPhone or an iOS device, you will have to purchase that Lightning to whatever that adapter is separately. I'll place the link below for that as well. The NX4 claims 7.5 hours of playback time before needing a charge via USB DAC mode. I find that was pretty, I didn't actually test that in practice, but it seems to be about right. The Q1, like I mentioned, says about 10 hours for the USB portion and 20 hours via auxiliary. Something I really like because I have an Android, and so when I had the Q1, I was just using it with the 3.5mm port line out, and it seemed like I never had to recharge it. Yeah, that's pretty much ideal. So in headphone amp mode, so if you're using a DAC into the NX4, it's rated at 28 hours before needing a charge. Yeah, so what's the final grade here for the hip-dac? Couple of things I would have liked to see. I mentioned the rubber bands. Playtime was a bit disappointing. They said 12, but I only was getting 6.5. Other than that, though, I think this deserves an A, maybe an A- because of those two things. It's a good all-around piece of equipment. Surely one of the most simplistic DACs I've ever used, but gets the job done. Looks beautiful, and does have the bass and the gain. Does have more power than the Q1. Can't remember exactly what the NX4 provided, but I'll probably just put a graphic up of that. I did appreciate the fact that they included their $15 OTG cable in the package here. The Cobalt now does also supply a Type-C, whereas the Red didn't. Would have been nice for them to add the a small adapter, a USB Type-C to micro adapter, but that's a little bit nitpicking a little bit. But overall, I do think it deserves a high marks. And yeah, that's about it for today, guys. I will leave links down below to all of this stuff. I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave me some love down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. If you like what I do here and you want to support the channel, hit that Patreon link down below. And last but not least, don't forget to ask me about my grandchildren. Check. Review brought to you by Stu. Here's the coda. I'm nasty on the mic. Call me warm soda. Chopped up this beat real fine like cold produce. Steady in my veggies so I can focus on my David Copperfield. Y'all hocus pocus. A little loopy when I wrote this. Esoteric dopeness. Cultivating the will of a soldier. Fighting through the pain like Dooku. I told ya, sold you on my style. Snapping on cats like Private Pile. I get semi-wild every once in a while. 911 on the dial. Alone at the top with no rival. Dark is my world without a Bible. Without God's love there's no survival. So my mindset is tribal. Yeah, my mindset is tribal. Yeah, my mindset is tribal. Stan? What are you doing, bud?
I'll be back.
The life and times of Stan. Where'd he go? Stan? Stan? Where are you? What are you doing back there, pal? Stan. There he is. Stan. Bye.